What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolve video. Alright soldiers, and we have one more day until set 16 is out, but we're going to be doing Havencraft and neutrals today, so look out for the neutrals later on today, but we are going to be doing Havencraft, so let's figure out what cards are coming out in set 16. Alright, looking at our first card, we have Lapis Shining Seraph. So he's a 3-cost 5/5, and this card is a follower while it has at least 4 prayer counters. And at the start of your main phase, you can select any number of other cards on your field and put a prayer counter on each of them and this card. But this follower does also have strike. Search your deck for and set to Seraph, summon it, and then shuffle your deck. Alright, so this is going to be a pretty good card because you're just going to be playing it and it's going to just be an amulet. It's not going to be a follower until it has 4 prayer counters. So it does turn into a 5/5, and then you can swing and get the Insetute Seraph out. Alright, next we have Rodeo Anthema of Judgment. So he's a 4-cost 3/4. You can evolve him for 1, and at the start of your end phase, if there are 2 or more amulets on your field, you can give your leader +2 defense. Alright, yes, some more amulet support. So of course, we're obviously going to have more than 2 or more amulets on the field, especially if we have things like Eidolon of Madness on field, then we're definitely going to be able to heal 2 at the end phase, but let's see what this evolve does. Alright, and looking at Rodeo Evolve, so he turns to a 4/5, but at the start of your end phase, we have 2 or more amulets, you still heal 2. But on Evolve, you search your deck for an amulet that costs 3 or less and then summon it. But on Super Evolve, you search your deck for an amulet that costs 5 or less and summon it and then shuffle. Alright, so this card actually procs itself for its end phase, so as long as you have at least 1 amulet on the field, you can go ahead and just get another 3 or less amulet for whatever situation you might need it for. And then on top of that, for Super Evolve, so when you have your Super Evolution point live, you can go ahead and get another amulet, but this one's going to cost 5 or less. Alrighty, next up we have Rana Dual Cannon Sister. So she's a 6-cost 3/3. When she comes into play Fanfare, you search your deck for up to 2 Wasteland cards not named Rana Dual Cannon Sister, up to a total of cost of 6, and put them into your EX area and then shuffle. This turn, they cost 0 to play, but you can summon a Bullet Bite token. You can also activate for 0 play points to deal 1 damage each enemy following the field, and then activate only once per turn. Alright, so it looks like this is going to be for the Wasteland deck, so being able to get Sugar Kiss Assassin is going to be very good, and you get another 2-cost card as well, just as long as it adds up to a total of 6, which is going to be a lot of combinations for Wasteland. And then on top of that, you do get the Bullet Bike, so if you do want to play the Sugar Kiss, you can buff her up and then have her as a bigger Storm follower, and then you also have the 0 play point play to go ahead and deal 1 damage each enemy following the field, just in case you want to go for the bigger 6-line play for Wasteland. Alrighty, next up we have Ronavero Darkhaven Ward. So he's a 3-cost 3/3. We can evolve him for 1. Alright, so looking at Darkhaven Ward Evolve, so it turns into a 4/4, but on Evolve you select enemy form on the field and change its attack to 0 and its defense to 1, and then engage it. You can also on Super Evolve to select a Faith spell that costs 4 or less, or a Faith amulet that costs 4 or less in your cemetery, and put it into your EX area, and this turn it costs 4 or less to play. Alright, so being able to just on Evolve change a follower's stats to 0/1 is actually just very good. You get to just essentially remove it, and then on top of that engage it. So you just can go ahead and trade into a follower, but you know, not take any damage since it does have 0 attack. But on Super Evolve, for when you do activate the Super Evolve point past turn 7 and turn 6 if you're going second, you can go ahead and choose a Faith spell that's 4 or less, or a Faith's amulet that you can go ahead and play and get as Fanfare. Alrighty, next up we have Salifa, Guardian of Water. So she's a 2-cost 2/3. When she comes to play Fanfare, you can engage an amulet on your field to select enemy fall on the field, and it can attack enemies during controller's next turn. And you can also activate to engage an amulet on your field to select enemy fall on the field, and it can attack enemies during its controller's next turn. You can activate only once per turn. Alright, so that might have been a mouthful, but on Fanfare you're able to engage an amulet and just freeze a follower, and it can attack, and then you're also able to do that on Activate as well. Alrighty, next we have Pact of the Beast Princess. So it's a 2-cost amulet, and whenever a Holy Tiger is put onto your field, you can select enemy fall on the field and engage it. You can also activate for 2 play points to engage this card and bury another amulet, and then summon a Holy Tiger token. Alright, so this is going to be a pretty nice 2-cost Faith amulet to have on the field to constantly get rid of those other amulets, so this is going to be a very good card for last words on amulets. Alrighty, next we have Angelic Prism Priestess. So she's a 2-cost 1/1. You can evolve her for 1, but when she comes into play Fanfare, look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You may reveal an amulet from among them and add it to your hand and put the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. Alright, so not bad for a 2-cost play, being able to look at the top 3, especially if your opponent didn't play anything on one, which is a chance that can happen. Alright, so looking at Prism Priestess Evolve, so she turns into a 2/2, but on Evolve you may summon an amulet that costs 2 or less from your hand. Alright, I get this is a pretty good card, especially if the amulet is like a 2-cost card that like deals 3 damage or spawns out a pretty good card or just draws you a card. You know, there's lots of concoctions you could definitely make with at least a 0 to 1 or 2-cost amulet. Alrighty, next up we have Reno Luxwing Featherfolk. So it's a 2-cost 3/2 and it has Rush, but when it comes into play Fanfare, if this was put onto the field by an ability, you can give it a sail, and for the rest of this turn this doesn't take damage, and also has a strike ability to deal 1 damage each enemy leader. Alright, so it looks like this is going to be a nice 2-cost card that we can probably either play from our cemetery or from our EX area to allow us to get the most out of our fanfare. Alrighty, next we have Serene Sanctuary, so it's a 1-cost amulet. So when it comes to play fanfare, search your deck for a luminary amulet, reveal it and add it to your hand, then shuffle, and then also last words to give your leader +1 defense. You can also activate to engage this card and then bury this card. You can activate only if this card has a prayer counter. Alright, so most likely you're not going to be doing that to give this card a prayer counter because it might be a waste, or unless there's going to be a card that checks to see if you have at least another amulet on field to have a prayer counter. Not exactly sure with the rest of the cards that we're going to be looking at, but I'm pretty sure there's not going to be anything like that because there's going to be lots of ways of getting this card off the field. Alright, next we have Iron Fist Priest, so he's a 4-cost 4/4, you can evolve him for 1 and he has Ward. Alright, so we have a nice little 4-cost for the Ward deck. I wonder what the evolve does. Alright, so looking at the Iron Fist Priest evolve, so he turns it to a 5/5 and he has Ward, but on evolve you can deal 4 damage to each enemy leader. Alright, so if you're able to play him and evolve him in the very same turn, I'm pretty sure like Wilbert's going to have a pretty nice time with this card, and especially if you're going first and you're establishing a whole bunch of value, being able to evolve this follower into a 5/5 with Ward and then dealing 4 damage as you evolve, and then warding up the very next turn to take a whole bunch of burn damage the next turn because your opponent is going to have to deal with your wall of a board that you have, so I think this card is going to be pretty cool. Alrighty, next we have Maeve, Guardian of Earth. So she's a 3-cost 3/4. She has Ward, but when she comes into play, fanfare, you can bury an amulet and give this follower +1/+1, and then give your leader +3 defense. Alright, so I really do like this card because you can just go ahead and bury an amulet to go ahead and trigger the last words of amulets that you do have for those last words amulets. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. And then on top of that, she turns it to a 3/5 with Ward, and then she also heals you for 3. So if an amulet does have last words to heal you some more, you can go ahead and add it on top of that. Alrighty, next up we have Holy Shield Maiden, so she's a 5-cost 4/6 and she has Ward, and during your turn this follower doesn't take damage. I'm not gonna lie to you, this kind of looks like a little bit of a fire soldier. I don't know if any of you soldiers watch Fire Force, but she kind of looks like a fire soldier. But this is a nice 5-cost ward that allows you not to take damage during your turn, which is pretty cool. Not really sure how often this is going to come up, but this is definitely just giving a bit of a bronze card. Alright, next up we have Manu Dark Dweller, so it's a 2-cost 2/2 and it has Ore, and when an amulet is put onto your field, you can give this follower +1 attack. Alright, so I'm not gonna lie, this card would have been mega busted if it had like a bigger stat line, because goodness gracious, you could keep it on the field, keep it reserved, and then just keep buffing it up if you could. But of course, having 2 defense means that it does suffer from an entire board wipe, because usually board wipes just start at 3. Alrighty, and lastly we have Darkhaven Grace, so it's a 4-cost amulet, so when it comes to play fanfare, you select enemy follow on the field and destroy it. You can also activate to engage this card and bury this card and deal 2 damage each enemy leader. Draw a card and you can activate only if there's a follower on your field that evolved this turn. Alright, so a 4-cost amulet that allows you to just hard remove something, which is pretty good, and then you're able to just go ahead and engage this for free to get rid of the amulet to have some board space, to go ahead and burn the enemy leader for 2 and then draw you a card. But you're only allowed to do this if a follower evolved, which is probably going to trigger on the turn that you go for Rodeo. Alrighty, and then we have our U for the set. We have Lapis Shining Seraph, so if anybody is looking forward to playing in Statue Seraph or collecting anything that is Lapis, be on the lookout for this. And alrighty soldiers, that is all of the cards for Havencraft. I'm very excited for all of the Havencraft mains out there to really do their stuff. Now I know Amulet Haven is getting a lot of stuff now, and I know Major Wasteland is something to not play with because during BCS Philly, I played against a lot of that deck, so I personally do want to build it now. But alright soldiers, we only have one more set of cards to talk about, and it's going to be neutrals, and you know it's not going to be too long, so be on the lookout for that today. But make sure you are safe in whatever you do tonight and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah, TRINN. Just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do.